reporting. MJ, what about tech debt? So this goes hand in hand with current projects, but those are the projects that we've sort of let languish.
Definitely. And David, you're right. Something as simple as having a glossary of terms and consistent terminology, some of that actually falls under the category of tech debt, and some of solving that falls under the category of governance. So we'll be coming back to that. But it is amazing as you work through acquisitions, as you work just through hiring people, the number of times we run across a single company that might have multiple terms for the same thing. And people don't understand that they're using different terms, or that they're using the same term to mean two different things. So even a glossary of terms and consistent terminology becomes really important.
Yeah, especially when an organization's scaling and you're hiring, bringing on, a new head of marketing, new head of demand gen, new head of, whatever department it is, you're establishing a new client success team to be able to hand them, this is what, when we say this term, this is what we mean within our organization. It just saves friction from later.
It does. And being a detailed person myself, it absolutely helps when I have a discovery conversation, for example, with a client about what they might or might not want to do with something. Understanding that the term that the first person I speak with means exactly the same thing as when the next person I speak with is using it is just, it's key for me, and it's obviously key for our clients. David, you were asking about tech debt. As we get closer and closer to deadlines like the end of the year, we get more and more rushed. And from a technical perspective, although I hate to say it, we sometimes take shortcuts. So rather than taking the time to review a really complicated page layout, we just throw a new section with a bunch of fields in there and we hope the users will figure it out. If we know we have to write a formula that's going to calculate a key date like 1 year from today, we don't take the time to take a leap year into account. Leap year's not happening for another 4 years. We don't have to worry about it. Sometimes it's big things like adding a validation rule that breaks a bunch of unit tests. And we figure the developers will sort that out later. Later is usually the night when a big deployment is due to happen. All of these kinds of things, these decisions that we make in the moment that seem like they might be okay, but come back to haunt us, all of that creates technical debt. Something that kind of sort of works okay now, but that definitely is going to have to be cleaned up someday. And the problem is someday sometimes never comes. And so the debt just keeps piling up and you keep working your way around it until you really can't anymore. The suggestion I have for you is probably not surprising to those who know how much of a list person I am, but it's to keep a list. You could keep a list in a custom object in Salesforce. You could keep it in a Google Sheet or Asana or in some other tool, but keep a running list of the items that you know you might need to come back to at some point. There are a couple of examples for end of year tech debt that you might even start looking at now. One of them is account, contact, and opportunity ownership. If you've had people leave the company over the course of the last year, what happened to their accounts, contacts, opportunities, and other key objects? Do you still have records that are assigned to inactive users? And if you do, who's keeping track of those things? Who's managing those opportunities, for example? So just running a report on that and going through to find out what the state of those records is and what you can do to resolve it is a great way to clear up a little bit of debt at the end of the year. From a more technical perspective, you may have jobs and other processes that are running in your org as the wrong users. Maybe your default workflow user from whom emails are sent is somebody who's no longer with the company. Best to go through the jobs, the automations, and make sure that the people, the users who are running them, are actually the right users, the ones who should. A big area that we see is field cleanup. I talked before about people just sort of throw fields in and hope the users will figure it out, but fields age out, people stop using them. And you can use a tool like Fieldtrip to see what fields aren't being used. And then if you can't delete those fields entirely, you can at least take them off of page layouts. Maybe you can hide them so they're not accessible in reporting where they're just going to confuse people. You can look at some house cleaning, and I'm a little embarrassed, but I'll admit that this is something that we need to do within OpFocus. Do a little bit of house cleaning to clear up technical debt around inactive workflow rules and process builders and automations and even Apex triggers. I look at the OpFocus org. Our project object is one of the biggest objects we have in the org. David, I hate to say it, but I suspect about a quarter of the validation rules that we have on that object are no longer active, and they're sitting there inactive and just cluttering up the view.
Yep.
Go through, generate a report, or look through and try to figure out what you have that's inactive and decide, are you ever going to activate it? If it hasn't been activated in the last 2 years, you can probably just delete it.
One of the related topics has to do with custom report types within Salesforce. For years, they have not been kept in sync. When you've added a custom field to an object, your existing custom report types haven't kept up to date. And with the winter release, there's a checkbox under setup, feature settings, analytics, report and dashboards, report dashboard settings, where every time going forward, when you add a new custom field, it'll keep custom report types up to date. But that still doesn't take care of the gap of, for some of us, it's been years that these custom report types have existed, but not been kept up to date. It's a very manual thing. It's literally dragging one field at a time. So that project object example, I've given it in speaking when I realized there were 200 fields missing from a custom report type. And if you're not using that report type, maybe it doesn't matter. But if an unsuspecting user comes along, it's certainly an area where you're exposed.
It definitely is, David. And the fact that fields are missing because we didn't think to add them before we had that checkbox that makes it so easy. The fact that things are missing is a challenge, and you'll occasionally get people saying, how do I report on this field? And you realize you have to go back and modify the custom report type. But almost even worse is the fact that fields that have become obsolete stay on the custom report type until you delete them, or at least make them inaccessible to anybody who might be inclined to look at them. Almost worse than not being able to find the data that you want is finding the wrong data and not realizing it.